Hey guys, hope you're well and Happy New Year. Today we are going to be seeing how Rareware followed up Donkey Kong Country. This 1994 revival of one of Nintendo's oldest characters was extremely successful. Donkey Kong Country was well received, sold like crazy, and was one of the most revolutionary games of the era. You better believe that as soon as the word was out about a sequel coming, millions of players were pumped and had some questions to be answered. There was a new direction of thrusting Diddy Kong into the spotlight with a new sidekick, and if you looked closely enough, you could see that we were here to rescue our old friend Donkey Kong. While Donkey Kong Country nailed its true feeling of isolation and nature, paired with an ever-increasing element of industrialization, this was only the first taste of what this Super Nintendo trilogy had to offer. Donkey Kong Country 2: Diddy's Conquest completely removes itself from any of the jungle environments you would have found on DK Isle. Diddy's Conquest has an entirely new set of themes, starting out on a pirate ship, then a molten land, forest, beehives, carnivals, swampy marshes, haunted woods, sticker brushes, and several more than that, all with gorgeous detail. And of course, with all of these new environments comes all new types of enemies and new sound effects. In fact, there's such a contrast between the two in overall mood, it's pretty darn surprising and impressive, to be honest. If Donkey Kong Country already felt like a full-on effort to you, Donkey Kong Country 2 feels like the same crew came back again to hit us even harder, as if there was still so much to prove. It's not common, but some players and critics have tried to use the unique graphics of Donkey Kong Country against it by saying it was somewhat of a gimmick while trying to nitpick or downplay the excellent design of the first game. So its sequel dropped the gloves and comes back swinging with significantly more content and difficulty than before. Your new partner Dixie Kong is even equipped with the ability to hover as a direct way to help balance things out for the player. In addition to completely new environments, new enemies, we also have some new animal pals and even sections where you play as the animals themselves. So how does it all stack up? We have 52 levels across 8 worlds to play through, with longer checkpoints and greater difficulty in an entirely new world to conquer in order to save our old pal Donkey Kong from the vengeful clutches of King K. Rool. Be sure to bring your best effort and tag your partner in for this one, because I'm Jeff and this is Marmax Gaming. Diddy's Conquest has a much darker feeling and more dire tone to it from the very beginning. And things also start out how the last game finished, aboard a pirate ship. First things to point out, which we will see throughout the entire adventure, is the breathtaking appearance, from the pre-rendered ship details to the multiple scrolling layers of the background sea. As mentioned earlier, there are plenty of new enemies to see along the way, including these little rats, plus a variety of piratical Kremlings. It's a pretty awesome touch that you can see and hear the water splash from when you knock an enemy overboard. Just as there were in Donkey Kong Country, we have a bonus room again, but this time they do serve a much greater purpose. They each give the opportunity to win a single coin that will ultimately need to pay tolls to access the Lost World as we complete this game. As mentioned, animal pals are back, and of course a crowd favorite like Rambi the Rhinoceros made the cut. And just like in Donkey Kong Country, he's waiting for us on the first level. Donkey Kong Country 2 does a nice job politely reminding the player to try their new abilities by spelling out the letter A few different times throughout the game. With Rambi, it builds up for a charge attack, which can pound through multiple enemies at once, or crash through the occasional wall. Sometimes it's about reaching or finding a coin, or, as the game puts it, destroy them all, defeat all the enemies for the coin to become obtainable. Donkey Kong Country 2 also has a unique way of ending its levels with only a jump or fall from a higher height than normal will allow you to reach its rotating prize. As the game does get more difficult, these can be quite helpful, especially if you nab the 1-up balloon. The entire first world manages to take place on and around this huge pirate ship. You can see and hear lots of atmospheric touches, like the moving clouds with the music incorporating a howling wind, or the first stage's creaking of the giant ship swaying in the wake. They clearly took the ability to climb to another level, as you were never able to move and pass over lines like you could in this game, and climbing horizontally, believe it or not, is entirely new. Something else worth mentioning is the somewhat frequent use of a cannonball needing to be carried to a nearby cannon in order to get blasted to the next bonus room and earn another coin. Another new ability we have that we can't forget about is pressing A actually gets your partner on your shoulders, whom you can now toss up to reach higher items or even a higher ledge, which is a pretty interesting mechanic. Not really sure how it makes sense, but hey, it's still cool and fun to use. Speaking of cool, that's definitely what they were going for when it came to your character's level clearing celebrations, and while Dixie Kong is a rock and roll type of girl with a sick bass line, Diddy Kong is pretty much the epitome of 90s hip hop style to the max. Aside from bananas and the accumulating Lost World coins, you also collect banana coins that are used as currency to save your game at Kong College. And my gosh, what are they teaching these kids? This is terrible work. You can also use them to get hints from our old pal Cranky Kong. It sure is neat what you can see in the background, with Killer Instinct art, an arcade cabinet, big Super Nintendo controller. Really cool to include all this stuff. We have a new Swanky Kong that we get to see in the game show, where you can pay to be quizzed, and if you get the few questions right, you are rewarded with 1 to 3 lives, depending on your wager and difficulty. Of course, we have Funky Kong back, who functions the same way as he did in Donkey Kong Country, allowing you to fly back to previous worlds. The last new collectible to mention are the gigantic golden DK coins, 1 per level in order to achieve the true 102% completion status. The first world gets the player ready for the upcoming challenges by gently warming them up with more and more pretty basic situations, while learning the behavior of some new enemies, like the guy who turns red and mad if you try to jump on him. Only a heavy object like a chest, cannonball, or barrel can take out this type of foe if you don't end up just moving past them. We've appreciated Donkey Kong Country's day to sunset transitions before, and they treat us to an impressively slow and gradual one in Gangplank Galleon. Isn't that the name of the water world in Donkey Kong 64? Oh wait, it's actually called Gloomy Galleon. We gotta play through that long game at some point. There's actually quite the different feel to the water levels from before. It used to be so tranquil with aquatic ambience. Now it's much more dramatic, starting out with Lockjaw's Locker. The water levels aren't so straightforward in DKC2. There's often multiple points where you can exit and re-enter with fluctuating water levels. Plus, there's more hard to see nooks and crannies and alternate paths. By the way, we've seen a lot of stunning graphical displays already, and it continues with really convincing pseudo 3D effects in the background. That's pretty neat to see. Plus, the surface of the water adjusts with your height too. and it's overall just really impressive. They didn't actually have anything quite like this in Donkey Kong Country, but what it does remind me of are the walls and dressers in Toy Story. There are some more dangerous and AI-driven water enemies than before that actually take aim for your characters. We get to see this type of setting used a few more times in the game. It's not all clear skies amongst the pirate ships. Like in Topsail Trouble, there's some nasty overcast with misty rain. But the real standout here is our first experience with our new snake animal pal, Rattly the Rattlesnake. He ultimately replaced the previous animal pal, Winky the Frog, probably because they liked using this guy more in the shape of a spring. And charging up with our snake actually lets us do a super tall hop as well. We get our precision and spatial awareness tested a bit more with our climbing abilities, and ultimately we are on our way to the first boss. Crow's Nest was hiding in plain sight all along. It's a minor addition, but the skull in DKC2 is a pretty darn cool way to mark a boss fight. The boss fights in DKC were pretty alright, but as we'll see, they were looking to really crush it out of the park in the sequel. A new thing our characters do in boss fights is strike a terrified pose first, which is awesome. It actually reminds me quite a bit of what Battletoads did. Maybe as a kid, seeing the vulture with its pirate hat is intimidating, but as an adult, it's honestly pretty hilarious. It's nothing crazy. You can hear and see an egg falling at a time. You have to jump on one, then hold it for when he charges in. Just have to do this a handful of times as the eggs get a bit faster and fall for longer each time. Then, we're on our way to the second world, Crocodile Cauldron. It sounds hot, it looks hot, and that's exactly what we're dealing with quite a bit in this world. As we move forward, things are getting a bit more serious with the platforming. Now, instead of falling down tall sails when you make a mistake, it's lethal. At least for us anyway. Not these guys. We encounter some new enemies, like this guy that looks like a barrel. Can be pretty annoying to deal with, if you're not ready. We also find our new spider pal, Squitter. This animal pal, I think many would agree, has the most interesting abilities we've seen yet. So you can shoot web projectiles with Y, which is great, while A puts out a different type of web. When you press A again, it flattens out for you to use as temporary suspended floors of web. So you can create your own platforms this way and even ascend high into the air, if and when the camera allows it. It's honestly just interesting and fun. The sections provided to use your animal pals in general are well put together and make you happy that you picked them up. Plus are often the only way you can reach certain key items and bonus rooms. Just when you think based on the overworld and level you just played, you're probably up against more lava, we actually get to experience the crystal caves that have formed due to all the heat in Cannon's Claim. Clearly, there's quite a bit of mining that goes on here, and this is when we get to have our ears blessed by the immaculate track Mining Melancholy. It's one of the highest praised musical scores, a track that actually builds on itself for a whole 45 seconds before serenading the player's ears for an entire minute before looping. It's nearly a 2-minute song. Let's have a listen together as we make our way to the top of this vertically oriented level. It's pretty fun the way they incorporated barrel blasting and all that goes into their exceptional level design that we will see plenty of for all 8 worlds. We get to experience more of the Lockjaw's locker action, but with a twist in Lava Lagoon. You actually bounce on a little seal friend that shoots out some bubbles, restoring the water to a safe temperature. Those bubbles must have been at like -1,000,000 degrees for this to work, but hey, it's a really awesome mechanic that puts a spin on an already cool water level concept. Another really memorable challenge is with Red Hot Ride. You can see the hot spouts inflate the hot air balloons, and it's up to you to lean forward as you descend as you look for the next spout or safe ground to jump to. They even give you Rambi out here. I mean, how fun and unexpected is that? The well-placed enemies and setups make for some really engaging and cool transitions as you make your way through its clever challenge. As we make our way to finish off the world, we actually go back into the crystal mines for an increase of challenging barrel shots and platforming, before we encounter Squawks the Parrot. This is the first time this animal pal is used in this type of way, but keep in mind he actually does appear first in Donkey Kong Country to hold a light for us for just one level. His full potential as an animal pal was not realized until Donkey Kong Country 2, now that he can carry the Kongs and shoot coconuts out of his mouth. Squawks really does make a huge impact on the game and shows up for some of the most memorable challenges that it has, so we will definitely end up seeing him again. Already on the second world boss, called Cleaver's Kiln. Cleaver is a giant possessed sword that appears at first with a flame hand around it, but it actually floats and swipes about in the air, which you need to avoid before throwing the cannonball at it. You hop across hooks and do your best to keep away. And you know who makes this fight really easy is Dixie Kong. She can easily end up gliding away, then holding the cannonball on her head as the cleaver comes down right into it. Just a handful of times of doing this, and we are on our way to the third world. Here we are in World 3, Krem Quay. We're now in a marsh environment, starting out with Barrel Bayou. There's a ton of detail in the bayou. It really is beautiful in its own way. The music contains so many atmospheric sound effects that you can tell they are really doing their best to help with the player's immersion. Timed barrel blasts are a fun new little addition. Getting Rambi out here is again another pleasant surprise. One thing I'm pretty sure we could all agree on though is that this is the strangest enemy in the entire series. It makes you really wonder how they even came up with the idea. As far as what comes next, we're actually swimming in the dark with Glimmer's Galleon. Although we only see him once because Glimmer behaves just like Squawks did in the first game. If one thing's clear, as we noted throughout Donkey Kong Country 2 continues to build on itself. Every stage is truly unique and fresh from the other. This doesn't happen by accident, it comes from meticulous attention to detail with a real plan. The levels themselves continue to add just one more thing, as they inch toward more difficulty, and it's just a joy to take in and recognize it. We're back into the swamp with Crockhead Clamor, and we meet a new double-sworded enemy that can actually be deceptively tricky to time your jump. If you jump before his swords are in the ground, he puts them right back up and it'll cost you a Kong or your life. This swamp has you mostly jumping between cattails or bouncing on crocs, and dragonflies. It's pretty much straightforward bouncy platforming. Well, for the most part. You gotta look out for shenanigans every once in a while. It's important to mention that the developers weren't afraid to go through the effort of planting little rewards for you where multiple things happen in only a couple inches of the screen. Like here, we see an arrow pointing upward as well as a sign that would despawn a spider if we had one. It makes you think, oh shoot, I must have missed something. Then you throw your Kong upward, find a bonus room, which is where we find Splitter, and then you use him to take out a handful of bees. You get your coin, get shot downward, and then you get a 1-up for your spider. I mean, how cool is that? What's really evident, if you're paying attention, is they did not hold back when making this game. If they had an idea, no matter how big or small, to make a level just that much better, they really just seemed to go for it. The new little mechanic here is to touch the barrel that makes the crocs emerge for you to cross the marshy gaps. Plus there are some neat and clever transitions along the way too. Next stage, Rattle Battle, on this ship is pretty interesting because it actually has the scenery from the first world, but just with a heavy light green tint over everything. As we've been seeing, Donkey Kong Country 2 likes to lean into the use of animal pals, and here's when we actually experience the first level where we seem to basically turn into an animal pal. If you have two Kongs, you still get 2 hits, so you still get that 1 hit of leniency in this form, but it's pretty cool to see the decisiveness of the developers just to go ahead and say, yeah, this level would be cool if they picked up an animal pal, but I don't want them to lose it the entire time, so screw it, let's just make them the animal, it'll be a lot more fun this way. Just wondering, it's pretty obscure though, does the sound effect when you get hit remind anybody of a different game they played? It's been so long since I have played this other game, but that unique noise brought it back immediately. Area 51. Anybody else played this in the arcade? Man, I wish I could find another one of these cabinets again. So what's this level like? Well, you get to enjoy the perks of being the snake. You can land on anything, and this plays into several moments throughout, and it's a lot of fun. Bouncing on enemies and objects over gaps, and it's a cool break from the swamp. In Slime Climb, it actually brings back World 1 assets again, but with some bumped up challenge and a new water level elevation hazard, complete with a big hungry chomping fish beneath you. If you want some anxiety, well, look no further than these types of moments. It's more quality platforming, and the game continues to test how well you can throw items as you move along. But we're about to encounter one of the most beloved and perhaps slightly hated settings in the entire game, Into the Thorny Bushes with Bramble Blast. Bramble Blast is in its own category of legendary retro gaming levels. The challenge is totally unique and comprised of 95% barrel blasting. It has the type of unique and abrupt difficulty curve that revolves around barrels in a somewhat similar fashion to how it felt going through the beginning of the Snow World in DKC. Rotating barrels with tight timing is required for minutes to get through challenges like this. It ended up being a great decision for David Wise to use this type of soothing, atmospheric, and somewhat quiet song to go alongside some of the most challenging levels in the game. It's another excellent track, arguably the best in the game, that takes its time building into its melody and actually is over 2 minutes long. Let's take our time and have a listen to this beautiful track as we make it through Bramble Blast's numerous hazards. Onward to the third world's boss, Cudgel's Contest. Want to see an intimidating figure? Well, here's Cudgel. Built bigger than Arnold in his heyday. Luckily, he doesn't just assault you outright with his club. He likes to jump up out of screen and come down, shaking the ground before you get your shot with a TNT barrel. He also does some hopping across the screen too as the fight goes on. All of his jumps and movements get a bit faster as he accumulates damage until the final blast. Here we are entering the fourth world where we see some of the craziest levels yet in the game. And just to be clear, that's crazy with a K in Crazy Kremland. Does it look crazy from here? I'd say so. It's a pretty cool choice of a world to re-dig their hooks into the player. And as if to say, you really haven't seen anything yet. Things start out in Hornet Hole. It's another S-tier level of graphics, atmosphere, and music. When people get gushing about Donkey Kong Country 2, it's because the game just hits you with haymaker after haymaker of hand over fist quality. This place is just full of detail. The foreground of dripping honey, background of honeycombs with larvae, freshly hatched bees in some of them, and of course, there's sticky honey used on the ground to stop you in your tracks, and on the wall in order to climb or descend. With each new game mechanic, Donkey Kong Country 2 does a great job providing a new type of challenge for the player, and the fact that the mechanics tie into their surroundings so well, that's what you call a very cohesive and beautiful experience. I didn't talk about these little bugs yet, but we saw them in the first world a couple times. You actually need 2 bop efforts to take these guys out before they flip back over. When you land on them, can't help but think of Squidward's footsteps. There's also quite a few porcupines that have managed to find their way into the beehive as well. Speaking of animals and bugs, we get another animal pal, our friend Squitter. Want to see something ridiculous? I got hit off of Squitter in a really precarious place, and he's running back and forth between these walls with the cannon in the middle. I'm trying my best to reach the guy, but I keep getting blocked by the dang barrel. It was pretty dangerous to keep trying, but I felt like it was worth it, even though I might die. Eventually, I somehow managed to squeeze into the corner just right to get him back, and all I could think of at the time was that it was totally worth it, except it wasn't at all. After the honeycomb is when we head into the park, and this is when it feels like they're really trying to treat the player with another one of the top tracks in the whole game. With those fireworks booming and crackling in the background. It looks so good. How awesome is that? An attention to detail you may not really notice is that there are some different death jingles for different themes. Now that's crazy. With the minecart levels being so memorable from Donkey Kong Country, seeing its spiritual successor with all of this hype, this is the type of stuff that might make you stop and go, okay, this is quickly turning into one of the best games that I've ever played. Makes you wonder how they're going to choose to follow this up. And that's when they hit you with the setting of the most difficult levels and most irresistible melody yet. As far as what you can expect, the thorn bushes immediately make you think of 2 things: gorgeous audio video and butt-puckering challenge. There's great lighting and detail on the close spiky thorns, along with the distant vines of brush surrounding us in the distance. And who better to accompany us through this challenge than with Squawks the Parrot. There are some sections with quite a lot to look out for, so you need to be comfortable with using B to flap your wings and Y to shoot at the same time. It really can get quite tricky and tight out there. By the way, you have to be careful near edges of the wooden platforms when you do walk. You can see here that I was kinda lucky to blow past the tough part, but then inched my way too close to the finish line, forcing me to do it all over again. Which was kind of garbage. So then that resulted in a chain reaction of a handful of deaths. Until finally putting the second sticker brush level behind us. With the honeycomb, festival, sticker brush combo, we can only hope that the world continues the fun, and it really doesn't disappoint with Rickety Race. Rickety Race is kind of like Diddy Kong Racing before Diddy Kong Racing. I mean, if you're being literal, that's actually true. We do some racing with Diddy Kong on the rickety track as we try to take first out of 10 racers. To finish the level, really, you just have to survive in order to move on. Surviving on its own can be quite difficult, maybe harder than what some would expect. You definitely can't be careless, that is for certain. It's a really fun level though. It's super cool to overtake the other drivers as you make split decisions to jump gaps, along with timing those jumps to take the next racer down. But beware, if your jump is slightly off, you'll actually nudge the next cart forward, which is pretty lame at the last second. In hindsight, I should have tried to hop more on these hills, but either way, we will move on with second place for now. After 4 straight levels of excitement, they mellow things back down with another swamp scenery. This time, difficulty is stepped up a little bit more and also introduce us to these porcupines. And to be honest, I never even thought of it or realized it before, but Donkey Kong Country 2 has 2 types of porcupine. That's really interesting actually. They're like, hey, we have 2 kinds, but we like both, so we'll keep both. They're way different styles too. Couldn't be more different. The kind you've seen up until this point just can't be jumped on. Simple. These ones have spinning flurries that can quill your Kong, or actually tie you up for a second before you're thrown upward. Have to jump on these guys when they're in between spinning. At the end of the level is actually an example of a unique prize. A well-timed jump off a moving barrel is the only way to get this DK medal. And yeah, it's really tight. I suppose that's another one that we'll have to wait until later for. We actually go back into another beehive, and you better believe it packs just a bit more challenge than the first time around. Plenty of bees to look out for, and you have to be really careful going up and down the sticky walls. But the real standout here is the way it ends. We actually have to switch over to Rambi. After making it through a bit more platforming tests with him, we're confronted with the gigantic and dangerous Queen. It gets a bit faster and faster, so you honestly can't make that many mistakes, especially on the home stretch. Can't figure out how to get this DK medal either, for now, since it seems impossible as Rambi, and it wouldn't let me through as the monkeys. I even tried to go backwards after winning the race, but that wouldn't work either, so yet another thing we have to save for later. By the way, after getting chased by the Queen, what do you see coming up next? We fought a gigantic bee before in Donkey Kong Country, so now we face off against King Zing Sting. Oh, okay, so it's not a queen, but a king bee, I guess. That's a first. This giant bee fight is a lot different than before. It's not just about grabbing a barrel and standing in the way, or throwing it at him if you wanted to, but we're actually Squawks the Parrot here. The whole fight takes place in the air, which is a pretty cool idea when it comes down to fighting bees. You have to use your projectile to hit its weak point. After a couple of those, some rounds of spikes slowly shoot out. There are actually a few phases to this fight. He becomes pretty fast to hit after you've already landed 4 shots. If you're not careful, it can actually be pretty tough to avoid him. After you've landed 6 shots, it may seem pretty surprising that there's a second form to the fight. The King Zing Sting actually breaks down into a smaller bee with a 3-bee shield. You have to take them out, then deal with how sketchy he can be toward the end. But after those 2 forms, it's onto the 5th world, Gloomy Gulch. We're getting higher up the tower, and there's more of a spooky theme for this world. We start out with Ghostly Grove. We have an amazing setting with really impressive and cool light shining effects that appear as if they're legitimately coming through the trees based on your point of view. It's another really surprising and impressive thing that they would even bother with such a detail, because it would look quite good even without that. But the further you go into Donkey Kong Country 2, you realize how above and beyond they really did go for the sequel, and there's still a couple worlds left until we face King K. Rool. Ghostly Grove does pack some interesting and challenging platforming tests, but its clever variety of enemies, plus its vanishing, reappearing ghost ropes, it really is such a beautiful song to have in a place like a haunted forest. It actually makes you feel like you're gonna be okay. It has such a nice little beat to it, with several different sounds to make it all come together. It's really quite creative, and has so much variety with multiple beautiful segments, making it the longest song we've seen yet, at 2 minutes and 10 seconds. It's absolutely incredible. It's another one of the top songs in the entire game, so as we make our way through the level, let's have a listen. Next up is the infamous Haunted Hall. The music is a huge contrast to the last stage. Sounds like we're going to be in legitimate danger. Well, after hopping on the mouse cart, we can see that we're not alone. The giant croc skeleton pirate ghost is right behind you for any mistakes. You earn more buffer time with green plus barrels, along with red subtraction barrels that you cannot afford to snag more than 1 or 2 of these at any time between its sections. A neat detail is that the ghosts actually have different colored bandanas, making it clear that there's a full-on pirate crew of ghosts out here. Things do get pretty fast and tight, making at least a couple attempts probably necessary if you get surprised by any of the hazards and/or run out of time. Just as Donkey Kong Country 2 has done in the past, it likes to bring back a familiar setting but with something new, and that's what it does with Gusty Glade. This time, instead of seeing the sun peek through the trees, we have leaves falling, and aside from looking nice with the level, they help the player see what direction the wind is blowing. There are some challenging moments out here with this, especially clearing this jump with the snake, but if you do, you'll be rewarded with a 3-up balloon, if you don't move too slow for it. The jump tests are pretty tricky, and it's easy to understand mistakes on parts like this, and of course, even right up until the end. What's quite a surprise, but fun, is going back into the beehives for another challenge, and this time it involves a descent with a purple squawks that can't shoot out nuts or fly upward at all. Parrot Shoot Panic is a really clever name, and also an impressive pun for how perfectly it describes the level. You do parachute down a chute full of bees with a purple parrot. It's basically what the whole level consists of, and the music goes really well with it. These types of levels that introduce a new mechanic in intervals and keep making it harder bit by bit, you know what it really reminds me of is one of Rare's first well-known games that did the exact same thing with many of its levels, Battletoads. It's like, at least they knew not to get insane and cheap with it here, but reasonably tough with Donkey Kong Country 2. Because it's a game with so many beautiful settings, such fun levels, and wonderful songs to experience. Speaking of wonderful songs, they continue to serenade us in the next forest level, and we remember the other 2 effects we've seen with the light through the trees, the leaves in the wind, and now it looks like we're dealing with a fog effect, which makes enough sense and goes well with the level and mood. Things get quite a bit different when you throw a unique animal pal into the mix, like Squitter, whom we get to use for the majority of the stage once we turn into him. They test your web abilities more than ever with these new challenges. It gets quite helpful if you're able to quickly tap A twice in a row, as you're jumping upward at the same time. It can get a bit sketch out here with webs wearing out and disappearing right underneath you. The camera can also be a bit tough and controlling, since it forces you from getting too far from the stage and its enemies. It can even act like a surprisingly low ceiling when you go to make a jump to safe ground after clearing an enemy. Since progress on a level like this doesn't move very fast, it can wear on you if you lose too many lives here. As tricky and even cumbersome as it can feel to keep laying webs, that's what it takes to get out of the spooky woods for good. But before we're actually out of the woods entirely, we have to square off with the world's boss, with a rubber match against Creepy Crow. I'm sure you still remember the first world's boss. Well, we have a much more involved fight with his ghostly spirit, plus a bunch of ghostly minions, and a normal one just to indicate that a barrel will spawn. Not like it really matters, but I'd say that they should have kept them as all ghosts. But who really cares? Between the hits you have to scale the ropes with eggs, coming in from above and on the sides. They don't really get thrown in the same ways either, so they can come in at pretty tough times, depending on what you're doing when they're already thrown. You have to hang in there through those 3 phases that increase with egg volume and crow enemies, until you put this big vulture to rest for good. It's almost hard to believe that we're already at the top with K. Rool's Keep. We're treated with a somewhat familiar sight, since Arctic Abyss has a pretty similar color scheme to a certain special level from Donkey Kong Country. Just, unfortunately, it comes without the shine to it. But the level itself has one of the most tranquil and calming songs you've ever heard. It's quite awesome how great the water effects look when you're in it with the background getting all wavy. Keep an eye out for secrets within Guard. Always thought it looked so sick when he charged up into a bonus room. The charge attack, speaking of that, can be quite useful. You just have to be careful with what position you leave yourself in, since the starfish enemies in particular can be pretty annoying. Something to remember about Donkey Kong Country, if you do get a game over, it goes back to the last save. So before leaving a world, it is highly advised to save, otherwise you'd have to do much more than just replay the previous boss fight. Speaking of amazing songs though, we are blessed with Mining Melancholy again in Windy Well. The leaves, as used before, indicate the wind, and what's pretty fun and different is that a lot of the stage is platforming separated by upward sustained gusts that elevate you through the area, trying to avoid a variety of enemies in a variety of situations. It's really great that they brought this theme back. It has been since the second world since we've heard this track last, and it was awesome to bring back a familiar setting with a twist, as they've done before. As if we haven't seen enough variety of settings within these levels, Donkey Kong Country 2 doesn't even bother using the same color scheme as earlier either, with gray and purple accented cave walls and a more cool color to the crystals in the background. As with most new concepts, as we were just talking about, it starts out pretty basic, then gets more advanced and tighter, with final moments seeming to push you a bit further towards the edge. After getting through this nicely recycled setting, we're actually introduced to a new setting in Castle Crush. It doesn't take more than a few seconds to realize what this level is going to be like. It effectively plays as an upward auto-scroller, with the floor steadily moving upward, which can crush you or your enemies. The darker colors can make it easier to miss such attention to detail, but the background does have the same 3D effect as we noticed earlier in the water levels, like Lockjaw's Locker. I could have pointed this out earlier, but anyone ever find the standard porcupine sound so odd? It has the faintest humming going on as it walks, but taking them out, it sounds like somebody's stepping or closing a door. I wonder what made them choose that. Speaking of sounds, I hope it's not too late to mention, I appreciate that they bothered to give the bees or zingers new sounds. But I will always find the sounds of their death in DKC as the funniest and therefore probably my favorite. With the floor crushing your enemies, the porcupines actually sound like their bones are getting smashed. They make some conscious decisions with their enemy mixes, like the big head crocs require a bop, while porcupine requires a roll. Easy to throw somebody off since you have to be on your toes, as they keep mixing which side of you they're on. It's a pretty cool stage with, once again, a new challenge or stage gimmick that pushes you right up until the end, before finally allowing you to move on to see what else could be ahead. We move up to K. Rool's Keep with Clapper's Cavern. It's pretty crazy that this type of environment would exist between the two castles, but onward into another dose of the beautiful ice setting. As we've been seeing, we don't normally have a second or third dose of a setting without something different going on, and this is no exception. The bit of difference here is that some sections we encounter Clapper again, the seal with the ultra sub-zero bubbles. If he was able to cool down boiling red cavern water with some bubbles, then what happens to cold water? It freezes solid for a substantial amount of time, and you run on its slippery surface as it slowly thaws. As if that wasn't enough of a change, there's actually one of those anxiety-provoking piranha-like fish that waits beneath the surface. You have to know how to platform and slide in a ducked position properly in order to move out of the Arctic and onward into the castle once again. Chain Link Chamber is as it sounds. We're going to have quite a bit of climbing on chain links. It's pretty interesting to see these guys again. Feels like we're back on a pirate ship. But we've gone through a lot to get this far. No matter who they bring back and no matter what they do with them, we've reached a point of no return. We've seen how tricky they can be with their enemy placement and setup so far. Well, you better believe that there's no coasting through levels like this late into the game. The climb is long and pretty treacherous, parts that require you to move swiftly and decisively, but if you get ahead of yourself, it is very easy to accidentally get caught, if you get careless. Can't assume that any area is safe. And after quite a bit of climbing, we aren't even at the boss yet, with Toxic Tower coming to us next. Now here is the most dangerous setting yet. The name of the level is immediately clear when you see all of that very poisonous looking green liquid beneath you. It's really important to point out their use of windows in the background, which shows the green goes as far as the eye can see. It's impressive that it is not only visible right beneath you, to be honest, and it helps the level play way better as a result, since you have a reference for just how close or far away the toxic is beneath you. It may come as a surprise that we even get squawks for a level like this, but that's because the level design kicks it up a notch. We have to blow through bees and some little winding hallways, up and down, to the side, fast enough otherwise we are getting caught. It's another section that is quite a bit easier if you're comfortable mashing B with Y at the same time. And as if that wasn't enough excitement, we then get to turn into Squitter. This is where some folks or younger gamers, I imagine, had a really hard time, always getting caught by the rising poison. But if you know how to move upward quickly with the double tap of A and landing at the same time, it's really no problem. And guess what? We finally reach our friend Donkey Kong and last boss fight. Or so it seems. As King K. Rool appears, leaving out at the top of the castle to his amazingly big and impressive 8-propeller copter. We've noted before how cool it is when an overworld helps tie a cohesive world and story together, which is exactly what this whole last scenario does, and with this new dire overworld theme, we know it's getting right up to the end. It looks like the ladder that we grabbed onto has us dragged and trapped inside a massive sticker brush. You know, they waited a few worlds and plenty of levels to show us the bramble setting that serenades our senses in every way. This time, the brush is thicker and the sky purplish instead of blue. Like we talked about earlier, these types of levels are challenging. They require a higher level of play, with even the earliest of jumps. This is what all of the levels have led to. It's like all of the precise platforming and climbing has boiled up into this moment. But what's a good bramble challenge without Squawks the Parrot? Now we understand why they call this Screech's Sprint. You have to move with a decent pace, in some sections more than others, but the trouble is trying to move quickly while not knowing what's in front, above, or below you. At least there's no contact damage from Screech, because that would be ridiculous. Things really change in mood with the song that plays for this race too. Definitely turned up the pace of what we're used to seeing in this setting. As you could guess, you lose a life if Screech finishes before you. It's just a matter of putting the decent handful of tries in until you know where the longest stretches are to attempt stretching your lead in order to stay ahead on the moments that are harder to do without stopping. After winning the race, it's finally time to see King K. Rool since we encountered him last time on his ship. King K. Rool Duel. As we enter the room, it's honestly quite shocking to witness King K. Rool just bashing DK with the butt of his gun and pounding him with shots. It's like, good God, what a psycho. And poor Donkey Kong, we definitely have to get him out of here. So last time we fought him, it was a series of building simple patterns that get more intense, with opportunity to strike in between. You might be surprised at first that after you see the cannonball to throw into his gun, that's not when you jump on him, because you actually never jump on him. It's a little detail, but I think they should have had you still bop him in between when his gun blows up. Hearing that memorable groan after a bop would be satisfying, and also a helpful part of the fight, so you can hear that you're dealing damage. So there are multiple sets of patterns out here. They get a bit faster and tougher as the fight goes on. they definitely make you earn it because the fight isn't short either. Fortunately, you do get a chance at another DK barrel about halfway through, when you might even think for a split second that it could be over when DK drops down. But just like in our last fight with King K. Rool, he doesn't go down for good without multiple extra efforts, and this time it's more than ever. His big gun is quite magical actually, since it works more like a wizard's wand than anything. It fires a multitude of projectiles in a variety of ways, can violently draw in air to cause contact damage, and even emits a fiery burst to propel him across the floor at varying speeds. With so many phases and attacks, it's understandable to come up short several times against this guy. With that in mind, you could imagine why Dixie Kong and her hover ability can be quite useful for a good portion of it. Where things really take a turn for the worse, and feels like a cheap kick to the nuts, is when King K. Rool goes invisible before coming your way. And it also gets really tough to finish him off when he disappears and reappears, sucking in air multiple times, where you're quite likely to get caught and take his gun across the face. With the fight lasting a couple minutes to get toward the end, this is significantly more challenging of a fight to finish than last time on his pirate ship. For a vast majority of players, this is where the adventure would end, but today we are going the distance to find every secret bonus room and conquer its challenges to earn all 75 Krem coins. And that will bring us to the most challenging of all, the lost levels, and to reach the true final fight of Donkey Kong Country 2. What you're about to see is hours worth of footage going through to snag these Krem coins. What I can tell you is that the vast majority of these bonus rooms are findable with pretty simple to moderate experimentation and looking around. But if I said that's how it is for all of them, it'd be a flat out lie. Completing the bonus rooms themselves are not often too challenging, they're pretty reasonable, but some of them can be tricky and tougher than others, which if you're placed right back outside the bonus barrel again, it doesn't really matter, no harm no foul, just try again. But if they're a bit tricky and you get placed in a way that makes you restart the level for another try, now that is where the annoyance and chore-like nature can start to settle in. This is just a rough approximation, but I'd say at least 60 to maybe 70% of the Krem coins aren't too ridiculous really at all, but there is a considerable amount that you'll just have a really hard time finding. And who in the world likes restarting levels over and over just to not find the bonus room you're still missing? Just like in Donkey Kong Country, an exclamation point means you've gotten all of the Krem coins, which could be as many as 3 or as little as 1. The other overworld indicator is for the golden DK coin, 1 per level. We will talk about the golden DK coins in just a little bit. With all of these bonus rooms to find and Krem coins to collect, it's no wonder that official strategy guides were released to help players finish the challenge and finally get their hands on what had mystified them prior. Of course, you'd never want to ruin the experience of a game and use the guide from the start. My recommendation to anybody trying to get the most out of this game, but also doesn't have all the time in the world, is to play through a level at least once, perhaps twice, looking, trying everything you can come up with before resorting to a guide, because you'd be surprised what you can figure out on your own. While some others, finally knowing the location is what saves you from eternal madness. Being that there are 75 of these, it's a considerable challenge and undertaking that you can't take lightly. But what it really boils down to, especially if you don't know where these things are, is maybe another 5 hours of play that could be chipped away at over a handful of sessions, and this type of stuff especially would be more fun to figure out with a friend or sibling, I'm sure. So with there being 75 Krem coins and 5 lost levels, this means that it costs 15 Krem coins to pass through each toll, since fighting your way past isn't really an option. Coming through your first toll, you can immediately tell that the vibe is even more intense than before. Just get a load of this overworld music. Let's take a look at our first jungle level in the game with Jungle Jinx. It's quite the different vibe from the rest of the game in this setting. Not to mention, the level design and mechanics are all that much crazier, being part of the Lost World. These huge monster truck tires roll in waves over these dangerous spikes, but fortunately, they're usually pretty simple to hold right on as you bounce to get through. It's honestly not that hard of a level to finish, but it is different. Another thing that's unique about these Lost levels is that each of them has just one bonus room, not for a Kremkoin, but for their golden DK coins. I think the one here is pretty easy to miss. Moving on to the second Lost level with Black Ice Battle. This is a pretty interesting level, just as different and bizarre as you might expect. Steeply inclined with a bunch of precariously placed enemies with a slippery surface, it's bound to probably take you out one time or two. And I don't mean to skimp on the details here, but it's just floor after floor of going down with different spreads of packed enemies. Another quite tricky arrangement to get to its bonus room, having to navigate with the cannonball, and never accidentally leaving it behind, of course. Aside from dealing with some preventable and sometimes funny deaths, it's not that big of an issue to finish off. Things do get bumped up and challenged just a bit more with Clobber Carnage. We are back in the jungle environment and things start off as over the top as they have been. Tons of these barrel enemies running around. Have to stay on your toes though, the whole level. I haven't specifically pointed these guys out before, but these extra scary dark red-eyed clobbers actually take away from your life count, which is really intense because they could do it multiple times in a row to drain your lives. Fortunately, it's not a problem to save at Granny's College before any of these tougher challenges. Where there's some more fun to be had and also where things are officially a bit tougher are with the tightness of these barrel sections. The level design though is really neat and something that we haven't seen even a little bit at any point in the rest of the game. Certainly gets your quick thinking and brain juices flowing in order to properly make it through sections like this. We've seen it before where bananas make your life a lot easier when trying to find hidden stuff, and that's exactly what we need to be thankful for here as well. The fourth Lost level has us back in the lava setting with Fiery Furnace. You might be surprised to see that DKC2 introduces a new mechanic that we haven't seen yet, with barrels that you can move about freely as the timer counts down before you're launched out. As we've seen them do with other new designs or ideas, things start out in a way for you to get used to how it works, as it gets more and more difficult with tighter windows, meaning less room for error. The enemy choices between those barrel blasting sections, along with their placement, can of course be problematic too. Fortunately, through all of these barrel tests, there's consistently a couple of bananas to quickly indicate the direction you should go in order to swiftly move through. The bonus room here isn't really that hidden. You're bound to see this barrel at the top of the screen. The only challenge is actually getting here with two Kongs in order to reach it. After coming out of the bonus room, you're already at the end of the level, and just like that, we are going to the most notoriously difficult and true final test in the game, Animal Antics. Animal Antics is where DKC2 not only feels like a celebratory send-off, but it also feels like the developers really wanted to give you one last challenge that you'd have to chew on for a while. It's a relay race style between all 5 animal pals, versus with Rambi, in the jungle environment. Fortunately, it's not very hard since Collision is really forgiving in your favor, and then you just have to use him to bounce on bees over multiple gaps in a row. It really doesn't take anything crazy to reach the next short section with Engard. In another ice setting, there's nothing too crazy here, but it does have a couple moments loaded with enemies, so if you don't go about it just the right way to get through those exploding pufferfish or all of those starfish, you'll probably lose some lives here. You also have to navigate past some extra dangerous chompers that can shoot out super far. But here comes the second half and what many would consider the biggest challenge in the entire game. We are back in the jungle with Squitter. This is where you're really going to be tested on your control with how you curve your webs and platform shots by holding up or down as they come out. Such careful platforming with this large of a sprite is more dangerous than you might think at first. There are many precariously placed bees, and as if that wasn't enough, you deal with a bit of an onslaught over a pit, so you need to shoot them down while also making sure you have a place to stand. There are some easier ways to go about this, which is important to know, to avoid facing them head on over and over again. You can just try to go as high as possible at first, but then make your way to the right with a lot less to worry about. You don't want to be too quick into the barrel though, since getting shot out would reveal a banana hint on where the final bonus room in the game is. Referring back to the main adventure of the game, remember how the last level they wanted to treat the player to was Sticker Brush Symphony? It's no coincidence that here, and as surprising as it is, that's where we handle Squitter next, having to deal with more incoming enemies while laying your platforms. You could see how a section like this would serve as quite the roadblock for a long list of players that struggle with the spider's mechanics. However, I think many would all say this is practically nothing compared to our next leg of the relay with Squawks the Parrot, where there's not only sticker brush everywhere, but there's a gusting wind that alternates from left to right every few seconds, never stopping the entire time. You want to know what you're made of? Well, Animal Antics is going to show you. It separates the boys from the men, and you really have to treat this like a science. Rocking down on left and right is never going to work here. You would inevitably go flying into a wall or a bee. It takes careful adjustments, like flipping Squawks back and forth to counter the wind, and requires some real anticipation of how the wind changes directions as you approach these various dangerous situations. The worst part of all of this is that the checkpoint for this level is at the start of the Squitter section. Any death here with Squawks doesn't put you back at the start of the sticker brush as you would hope, so you could imagine how the back-to-back challenges of Squitter and Squawks is one of the most infamous rage-inducing scenarios in the entire 16-bit era. This isn't some brokenly hard level in an obscure, poorly put together game. It's the most selling Super Nintendo game that didn't come in a console bundle of all time. Players of all ages had to go through a lot to get to this point, and the feeling of being so close yet so far is bound to drive some people mad. If you're able to get through these two sections, things aren't even done yet with one more nerve-wracking section of Rattly the Rattlesnake. What better way to follow up two of the toughest and most dangerous sections in the game than with one more checkpoint-free stretch landing in narrow gaps between spikes, using enemy bounces to get there. This is one of those things that the weight of knowing how far you have to go back is bound to cloud some judgment and put too much pressure onto the player to properly get through these last handful of careful jumps. The way the level ends too is like a huge stomp on your nuts. Getting shot out of the final barrel into these bees is not a great feeling, this is for certain, but it's the last thing you need to do in order to unlock the final fight in the game. Before we fight King K. Rool for the second time, I just wanted to briefly montage and talk about the golden DK coins. Although they are not required for this fight, they are required to reach the 102% completion status. Similar to the Krem coins and bonus rooms, some of them are extremely difficult to find and will leave you begging for a guide. You have to do above and beyond exploration. And what that looks like in a platformer is leaving no space unexplored. Even when the screen doesn't scroll with you at first, it might if you push on a certain part of it. Or you may be getting led one way with enemies and level design when you need to make the conscious decision to ignore the flow and go against it in order to hopefully reveal a new path that will lead you to the DK coin. Some are of course not that horrendous to find, but when you need to push against a seemingly random solid wall to find one of the last ones, that's where I throw the flag. This is not okay, and I don't support this type of cryptic design for something required to get the true completion of the game. There's also a couple that are notoriously placed in the shuffle of end-of-level rewards on a super tight window in order to achieve them. Bouncing off a moving barrel requires patience and some real visual processing to pick and choose the right timing to go for this. And another one that has made countless kids' eyes well up with tears of frustration happens to take place at the end of one of the more challenging, longer levels with Squitter. You have to get through over a couple minutes worth of careful web platforming, and the worst part is, it's not like if you miss either of these DK coins, you can start and select to quit back to the checkpoint or get another try. Clearing the level resets the checkpoint all the way back to the beginning, so you already know what that means. Going through everything again, every single time you need another attempt at that tiny little window. Finding some of these on your own is satisfying and very rewarding because you don't just feel good at the game, it makes you feel smart too. Unfortunately, being smart still isn't very likely to find you all of these. And once again, that is why so many guides existed then and also why so many are created now. When you beat K. Rool in either fight, it actually shows how little you've collected compared to the other players. And it sure is awesome to look at Mario, Yoshi, and even Link with the Rareware Silicon graphics treatment. The Mario and Yoshi remind me a whole lot of Super Mario RPG here. I'm sure others have felt that same way too. Surprisingly enough, they even have a trash bin in the corner with Sonic the Hedgehog's shoes and Earthworm Jim's laser gun, calling them no-hopers. Talk about a heated rivalry. It takes a long time and a lot of effort to get to the top of this podium, and depending on how you went about it, some may even say it's not even worth it. But there we are, at the top with all of the golden DK coins. Now let's move on to the final fight in the game. We take to the center of the Lost World map in Crocodile Core. Here we get to see Rool has made it out of the shark-infested waters for one last stand. The last fight with Rool is kind of like the Lost World. It's harder and more surprising than ever before. Based on what you learned in the first fight with him, you'd expect to evade some waves of shots and then clog his gun. But after a while, you start to wonder if and when that barrel is ever coming. I can tell you that, with how these spike balls keep coming, you will want to use the full length of the screen to make some of these barrages easier to deal with, since they come in quite fast and moving away helps. The purple clouds won't do you any favors either. If you touch those, it reverses your D-pad control, and when dealing with this type of precision, not knowing when it'll wear off is a problem. Believe it or not, despite how many deaths you might endure, this whole final battle is just one onslaught that gradually picks up the intensity more and more for the longest minute of your life, until you finally have your shot.